Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this opening half and prep time workshop. It's going to be delivered by me because unfortunately Lucia could not make it in time because of flights and late buses. And also I'm not feeling too well, so I apologize in advance if this is going to be more underwhelming than you would have expected. My idea is to cover different skill sets that I think you as advanced debaters could use and try to have a specific drill for each and every one of them. We might have to cut some things, maybe some theoretical explanations, maybe some parts of drills depending on time. However, this is not going to be a comprehensive workshop where I outline all 15 minutes of prep time and just give you like templates of what to do, because I believe that advanced debaters rather need more like specific snippets of knowledge that they can use in specific situations. So what I would start with is like a short Q&A in the sense of asking you, are there any things that you guys want answered in this workshop? Any questions specifically that you have in terms of debating that you would like to ask a judge or anyone who could give you comprehensive feedback? What do you want to take away from this? If anything. Right, and if there's nothing from you guys, nothing to add, then I'm just gonna outline what I'm gonna do here. I think there are three things that I want to focus. First of all is generally prep time and what are strategic things you have to do in prep time from opening half. Second is how to build a preemptive case. And third would be what if you know nothing about the motion, and then a little bit about like incentive analysis and effect analysis and how that works and how that helps. So in terms of prep time, as I said, I'm not going to outline what to do in every 15 minutes you have. However, what I am going to emphasize that is important is that when you begin your prep time, do not dive headfirst into arguments. So even if you hear a motion that you think you know something about, you think you know what a motion is about, take 2 or 3 minutes and talk about like what it is. Exchange information. What do you know? What does your partner know? What do you believe the motion is about? Why did the CE team set it? What is the current context in which the motion takes place? That's very important because if you don't know anything about the motion, it's very important to get all the information you have out. If you know a lot about the motion, it's very easy to go wrong because you deeply believe that the motion is about something and you want it to be about something. But at the end of the day, there are other clashes which you might overlook if you do not stop and think, okay, why did the CE team set this motion regardless of my personal beliefs, regardless of my personal knowledge? So something that I would advise if you have motions where one of you lacks information, like for example, when Lover and I debate economics and I really don't know economics. What we do is like we sit down and we take the first 2 minutes and I say, okay, Lover, explain this to me. And then he talks about things and then I ask, okay, if I understand correctly, can we draw the premise that if we do X, Y will happen? Yes, no, yes, okay, move on. Now explain this to me. And we'll spend 3 or 4 minutes doing that. Why? Because at the end of the day, if there's a partner who knows less about the topic, it's very important that they are also able to draw premises. So not just read the case out that your partner writes for you, but be able to get at least some kind of working knowledge that you yourself can use during the speech, that you can create your own rebuttal, because if your partner has to write both your speech and his speech, it's probably not going to end up very well. So that exchange of information is very important. What I would like to emphasize, especially when it comes to prep time, is burdens. In other words, what do we have to prove? Why does that matter? Because in strong groups, so if you have Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and Stanford in your group, everybody's going to say things that are correct. So you're not going to prove that they're lying, you're not going to prove that they're saying stupid stuff. Mostly they're going to prove their arguments are mostly going to be logical. The debate is going to be won on who proves that their burden is the most important. So the debate is won not on saying they're wrong, we're right. The debate is most often won on saying, although they are right, although we can concede that they prove some of these things and probably they help some people, here's why what we are proving is more important. And that meta-debating part is essentially what wins you the strongest debates. Most often there are 2 types of burdens you can have. Most often you can find both a principle and a practical burden, i.e. to prove that something is justified, and the other side to prove that it's more effective, to prove it helps more people, and saves more lives. Of course, every one of you knows that you have to think about burdens, and that's very important. There are a couple of things I want to emphasize. First, from closing half, it's incredibly important to insert this into your speech. That the PM and the LO uses the introduction to say, this is our stance, this is our advocacy, this is what we have to prove. And explain why you believe you have to prove that. This is incredibly important for, well, a number of reasons. One is that it makes the debate easier to judge, it makes you guys easier to weigh against other teams. So for example, when we had a motion at Worlds that this house regrets the narrative that romantic love is the primary source of enjoyment in life, the first minute of my PM was, look, our burden in this debate is not to prove that, like, it's essentially only to prove that the people who are impacted by this are the people who currently do not enjoy romantic love, because they're the ones who are only hit by this motion. Here's why others are not, here's why these people are. That's how you ask against other teams. That, at the end of the day, is something that's very important, especially from OpenCut. So what does essentially this mean? This means that you are trying to make a preemptive about what other teams are going to prove in the debate. So in order to do that, one of the questions you ask yourself in prep time is, what is comparative and what is not comparative? And you delineate it at the beginning of your speech. What you're essentially trying to do is say, this is what the debate is not about, this is what the debate is about. What you're trying to do by that is essentially stop closing from taking one niche issue and having an extension only on that and comparing themselves only on that and taking the debate away from you. You want to explain why you do not want to debate other stuff. First of all, because that reduces the scope of action the closing has and they cannot stab you by running that extension. Secondly, because in your first minute, there's also a psychological effect, and that is that you have a veneer of objectivity. You may psychologically discourage other teams from running arguments on what you say is uncomparative. Because if during your first minute, you act as if it's like very obvious, as if it's a definition, you provide 3 reasons why this is uncomparative, there is a large amount of chance that especially like mediocre teams are going to be discouraged from running those arguments because they will believe that you have preempted them effectively. Therefore, you're going to have a less strong analysis from their side. What you also need to do in terms of burdens is try to do preemptive weighing, in a sense of what are the burdens of other teams? And this is a very important question to ask yourself in prep time. Not just what we have to prove, but also what they have to prove. Because that then allows you to come from OG and OO and say, okay, look, regardless of what, say you're OG, regardless of what CG tries to prove, it's necessarily contingent on the mechanisms we give you. Whatever CG's case will be, it has to rely on what we brought you in practical. Whatever CG proves you in practical, it's more important that we prove you that the principle stands because the principle is independent of outcome. But in order to do this, you have to think about what are the burdens of the other teams in that room and try to weigh it preemptively. Like whatever happens from the other side, here are the reasons why we necessarily outweigh this. And my advice is like plan this out in prep time. This should be a planned part of your speech. At what point and in what way do I preemptively compare my burdens? And in what way do I think that helps me in the debate? So essentially, when you're doing framing, what you are trying to do, you're moving to exclude other teams from the room. You want to reduce their scope of action. Why? Because you want to draw the debate towards something you know more about. Essentially, for example, the motion we had yesterday about the belief in the afterlife. For example, it's very easy for any Gov team to run harms of organized religion. And in that case, it's a very intelligent frame to try to run that debate as being about organized religion. And that is the way you should try to think about frames. What are the arguments you're comfortable with running? What are some templates you know will go through? And then try to frame the debate as being about that specifically. I think that's also an advice that I can give you in this sort of situation. So the first thing that I would like to do is have a drill about analyzing burdens. Like I'm going to give you a motion, I'm going to give you about 6 or 7 minutes. Try to find what your burdens are in this debate and what you have to prove within this debate. Then we're going to discuss it and how do we preemptively weigh those things off against other things. So all of you guys imagine your OG and take into account the things I told you. Think about what other teams have to prove, think about what is comparative, what is uncomparative, think about how would you preemptively weigh what you think your case would be against other teams. So the motion is, this house regrets the depiction of the everyday life of people with disabilities as inspirational. So this house regrets the depiction of the everyday life of people with disabilities as inspirational. So it is now 11:32. Let's say I'm going to give you till 11:38, 39, and then we're going to discuss.
So exercises.
We do it alone?
Yeah. Huh?
We do it alone?
Yes. Did you revise it?
Yes.
portrayal. How?
Okay.
Yeah. discussing this. So what do you guys have in terms of burdens? What do you think are the burdens you have to prove from government side in this case?
I think we should first start about thinking, since it's a this house regrets motion, if we're not talking inspirational, that what's our model, what's the picture we want to have. I think it's very important to talk about the perception of why this inspiration is necessarily something that we would not want, rather than have like an average everyday life. But when talking mentions and burdens, I think what the debate is about is proving the benefits these people can have through the perception of themselves, their own disability, to the perception of how average people view them and how other people with disabilities view other people with disabilities. So I think it's like a battle of the perception, and like the final metric is how can we make the life of these people the most fulfilled or the easiest to deal with.
Okay, in which ways do you think you can plausibly do it from government? And which things do you think are marginal and probably do not change on either side? And that's also a question that you should usually ask yourself in prep time. What do you think you can plausibly change from government? In terms of like, so what it says, we want to improve their quality of life. Which parts of their quality of life do you think we can significantly influence from government? Which things do you think are more marginal and probably do not change on either side of the house? Okay, so to what extent do you believe you can impact policy?
I have kind of a different frame for this.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I said it has to take more analysis and proving that this is how we go about this. So this debate is mostly about those who. The premise is this debate is about those who are disabled, but who for a lot of structural reasons cannot lead a life that's inspiring. Like everyone else is uncompared because there's a bunch of places to draw inspiration from. Those who are disabled and are now inspirational, actually probably inspirational anyways because of their personality. This is about those who now see and expect it to be inspirational, but are average Joes or even without disabled and probably not going to be inspirational. And this narrative harms them.
Yes. So essentially what we can draw from what Petra said is you're probably more likely to impact the everyday psychological well-being of an individual rather than be more likely to change society. That's, for example, like a rule of thumb for narrative debates. You're always more likely to impact the self-perception of an individual or like the perception of that individual in the eyes of others rather than impacting some kind of societal structure. For example, in this motion, it would be hard to argue for both sides to get significant change, I don't know, in disability policy or NHS funding for a number of reasons. Because, I don't know, one, it's bipartisan, nobody wants to defund disabled people. B, because policymakers very often do not care about how shows and, I don't know, comedy blocks on TV portray other people and stuff like that. And this is something that, although all of you are nodding your heads and it seems logical to you, it's something that is very smart to say at the beginning of your speech. So for example, I think that both from Gov and from Ops, in order to reduce the scope of action for extensions, it's very smart to say, this debate is not about policy. Here's 3 reasons why it's not about policy, and then it becomes exclusively about the perception. Why? Because then if your OGO will engage on that clash, but if you have significantly reduced the scope of action for closing, the only thing you need to do is to win that clash against OO. Because essentially, it's then harder for closing teams to make an extension. So what do you think opposition would run here? I told you to like try to think of what the other side would be. Like intuitively, what would opposition want in this motion?
The same thing, but saying that comparatively, those who... So if you depict these people as inspirational, this is specifically going to impact those that cannot lead inspiring lives by themselves because now they have somewhere specific to draw inspiration from that's highly relatable to them, and then you kind of increase you reduce the amount of people who are structurally fucked as the government says.
Okay, so presumably a good op is going to prove this to a certain extent. They are going to prove that there are some disabled people who are going to draw inspiration. They are going to be able to prove that this might make it easier for them to cope with like their everyday lives, reduce stress and increase happiness. Given that they proved this, and given that we agreed, like Petra and Oleg outlined this and everybody agrees with like what the Gov case would be, given that op would prove to a certain extent that some people are inspired and some people are more happy, How do you weigh this off from gut? How do you say, even if they prove this, here's what on our side is more important? What would you say within that framework?
Even if they're able to prove that a few more people are inspired, the harm to those that aren't inspired is much greater than those that get known.
Can you weigh off the numbers? Can you make a probability claim about how many people are likely to be inspired and how many are not?
Yeah, I think that it's. I would make that claim in two ways. First, I would say that most people are just not going to be greatly inspired. That's not, it's hard for anything to inspire that much actual effect in life. But secondly, I want to say that there are still going to be inspirational disabled people like are bound to get inspiration from. If you can be inspired, there's probably going to be a source for you to draw your inspiration from. But the point is that expectation.
Yeah, you're more or less on track. Another claim I would perhaps make is similar to the claim about affirmative action. You know, how in affirmative action motions, there's very often a claim from OP that says affirmative action only helps those who are already best off. Because this means more black people now get into uni because there's quotas, but what about people who do not reach the uni level at all? I think the same argument can be made here. The people that are going to be inspired, the people that are going to be motivated to, I don't know, take up Paralympic basketball, are people who are already motivated, who are already dealing relatively well with their disability, and who want to find some kind of purpose in life. This might be like the nudge that they need to join a local sports team or whatever. There's a huge amount of people that are struggling, there's a huge amount of people who find it hard, who are embarrassed about themselves, and who this is probably going to embarrass more. So quantify. In a situation where you can equally plausibly prove your arguments, resort to the classic comparative modes. Can you prove that your argument, which is equally well proven as ops, applies to more people? Can you prove that your argument, which is equally well proven to ops, applies on the longer term? So there are like classical thumbnails for comparatives, which you probably all learn at your training session. Like how many people this impacts, how long does this last, how vulnerable is which group? Just resort to this. If you have equally proven arguments, use a mode of comparative and show that although the arguments are equally well proven, therefore we concede something to their side, there is a reason why our argument is more impactful. And I think a good advice for you, if you're struggling with this, is when you go into a debate, just carry a paper and give me a small post-it with like reminders written down in a flashy color, as in compare or weigh things off, or remember to say how this impacts the debate. Simply, and carry it with you onto your speech, so stick it on the table and look at it. Because very often, these are things that you learn in your training sessions which you forget. Like for example, you do excellent rebuttal, you do excellent weighing, but you forget to say, why does this matter? How does this affect the debate? I think that's a very important advice to give. Do debate commentary. So after you do a rebuttal, which plausibly shows that the other side is wrong, or at least less right than they thought they were, explain to me what this does in the context of me judging the debate. So what I did by explaining this rebuttal is tell you that their primary point is mitigated. Given that their primary point is mitigated, the significance of the case I bring you is instantly higher, because the harms that they try to bring you are not that important. This means that when weighing off my benefits, you weigh them off as more important because the countervailing harms are less important. That's something you have to say explicitly, because it allows judges to follow debates more clearly, especially in good groups. Contrary to popular belief, good groups tend to be the most messy, because all teams have good arguments, all teams have good reasons, and they all try to counter the ground. So doing this kind of explicit weighing is something that I would advise all teams to do, especially because all of you guys are ESL. So EPA arguments are gonna go through because they sound good, because they sound persuasive, because someone's gonna get so emotional about these disabled people that they're gonna use analogies, they're gonna use beautiful language, they're gonna persuade people. Especially in large panels where you have inexperienced wings, they're gonna be persuaded. You have to come with clear-cut logic and say, look, this is the comparative. They sound very nice. However, they never weighed off their case. They never weighed off their benefits. Even if they are correct to a certain extent, here's what we bring to you on the other side. And I think that's something that I would advise you to do, and I would advise you to carry reminders and just help to do things like that. Okay, that concludes the first part concerning burdens and rep time and how to put out. Are there any questions here? Okay. Second thing I want to talk about is building a preemptive case. And this is not just what we talked about in the first part of the lecture, like building a preemptive framing and preemptive weighing. This is about how to integrate your rebuttal and how to try to predict what the other team is going to say and how to respond to this. There are a number of reasons why this is important. First of all, because you as an opening team do not have a chance to engage with closing teams. Secondly, because it radically increases your stakes. Because all judges are also debaters, and all judges are very frustrated that when they debate, they do not have a chance to respond to that stupid extension coming from CO. Meaning that when you include preemptive rebuttal, judges are going to appreciate the fact that you did. They're going to increase their speaker points. So even if the preemptive rebuttal is not all that good, you structurally respect the format and you fulfill your role better if you try to do this. The third reason why this is important is because it impacts your POI strategy. Because notably from both OG and OO, your POI strategy is very often to say, look, we said this, do not neglect in debate. Having preemptive rebuttal allows you to raise a POI, for example, if you're OG and CG is doing some rebuttal to opposition, to raise a POI which says, this rebuttal, which necessarily attacks the crux of opposition case, came out in our speeches, and value it as such. It gives you more material to remind judges of later on, and to tell them in POIs, this is something you have to do. Yes, of course. POIs do not necessarily have to be questions directed at the team that you're raising a POI to. So I'm straying off the subject for a bit, but when you're doing POIs, my advice is write it down. Have a POI paper and write it down with your partner. Like literally write out full sentences. And then give it out to your partner and let your partner change. I don't know, change punctuation marks, add a part of a sentence, remove a part of a sentence. Why? Because every word you say in your POI is important. So even if you have a POI that lasts like 14 seconds, and only the last part of the POI is, and remember we said that in OG, that part is important. If you can start a POI by saying, unlike CO's extension, which is very derivative, what we told you is, so like these offhand comments that you make with which you start your POI or end your POI, can be very important to position yourself in contrast to other teams. And this is why write down full sentences. Write down the intro of your POI. Write down the end of your POI. You want to remind the judge of as many things as you can when you are giving that point of information. So, when talking about preemptive rebuttal, it can be rebuttal. It can be saying they're probably going to say this, but it's wrong. But more often than not, it's a preemptive trade-off. Saying, even if they prove this, and we know that they probably will to a certain extent, here's why something is more important. So I cannot give you much theory in preemptive rebuttal, because I cannot give you much theory on rebuttal. It just comes down to you thinking of things that are intelligent. I could give you a template of different types of rebuttal, but that's something you do at beginner lectures, and you've probably heard of that 1,000 times in your training sessions, and you're probably going to hear about that in this academy. So what I want to start with immediately is a drill. So I'm going to give you a motion. I'm just going to give you like 5 or 6 minutes. Try to think, so again, you're OG. Try to think of everything opposition can say and what the responses would be to that. So the motion is, this house would make the weight of votes, weight as W-E-I-G-H-T, weight of votes, proportional to a person's expected lifespan. This house will make the weight of votes proportional to a person's expected lifespan. What this means, in other words, is that younger people get more votes. So everything opposition might say, how do you respond to this? It's 11:52, I would like to start at 11:57-ish, so you have time for the last part, which I think is arguably the most important in this lecture. like to get started with this? Would anyone from the left side of the table care to share their idea this time?
Okay, okay. Yeah, they're probably going to speak about how democracy is important and how it's important to everybody have the equal rights. But I think democracy is rigid in the status quo where if you're 18 minus, you cannot vote. If you are in jail, you cannot vote and stuff like that. And remember what they're going to speak is this is about these young guys are going to have worse decisions because they don't have enough information. Two responses on that. I think firstly that it's the easiest to actually affect the oldest one because they're the ones who are in status quo in 21st century having the last information because they don't use internet that much, and the young ones are actually the ones who are the most engaging in Twitter and in stuff like that. But more important is this choice is never about free choice is never about getting the best choice. It's just about having the opportunity to choose. So we think that it's fair that people who are going to live here the most and people who are the most affected by these policies are the ones who actually need to have the most influence in having them.
Fair. I would like to talk mostly about the first point that you mentioned. That is that the opposition is probably going to stand up and say democracy is essentially about everybody having the equal possibility to choose. Do you think it would be intelligent to try to attack that principle directly from government and say, no, that's wrong and stupid? Would you say no, democracy should not be about everybody having the equal opportunity to have recourse?
No, not like that. I think just democracy is rigid in the status quo without this.
Sure. So if you disagree and you say, okay, we agree with opposition that democracy is essentially about everybody having equal possibility to choose. What then do you have to prove? To an extent. What then do you have to prove about the characteristics of young people versus old people? So if you say the goal is to give everybody the same opportunity to choose, and you're implementing this policy to solve a problem, what do you want to claim the problem is in the status quo?
Probably you run against the people nowadays, they're young and they don't see the impact of anything. Like probably one of the government arguments would be that, and that you're going to solve it. But like mainly what we're talking here about would be that even though that if they, for example, prove to us it is unfair, or they're like, for example, old people would make more rational decisions, we say that this is not going to be, that they are not going to be affected by the policies passed as a consequence of the voting. Therefore, because of the time that is going to pass, therefore, this burden that we have to prove is much more stronger than the other one.
One thing I would go is just directly prove the principle would be to say, yeah, but the point of democracy and equality is for everyone to have, as you said, equal possibilities and equal power. In the status quo, for many structural reasons, those who are older usually more powerful and more political power stuff.
Bullseye. That's what I want to hear. So what I'm going at here, what I'm trying to say here is, when I'm saying think about what the other side will say, I think it's very intelligent of you to think about, okay, there are specific points, like what are they going to say, who is more easily affected. But what is, I think, maybe more important when making preemptive, because most often in prep you don't have 15 minutes just for preemptive, is to think what is going to be the team line of the other side, their main premise, their frame. That's the thing you have to preempt. So, if the way they're going to frame this debate is about being everybody should have the equal right to choose. First question, do we agree or do we disagree? We probably agree because it's stupid to disagree, it takes too much time to explain why we disagree. If we agree, the preemptive is essentially how do we prove that we fulfill their frame better? And that's what Becca said. If the goal is to equalize power and equalize recourse towards the state, then you want to prove that the reason why you're giving young people more votes is because there are a number of reasons why old people are overrepresented. And you gave snippets of answers. You said, okay, young people are going to live here longer, but some of them can't even vote because they're under 18, this means they're underrepresented. You also gave part of an answer. All these things you said are snippets of answers which go under a large preemptive headline, and that is, here are reasons why old people are overrepresented in status quo. Why am I saying this? Because preemptive is not trying to think of every single specific point that they're going to come up with in the debate. You probably cannot, and you probably cannot rebut every point that they come up with in the debate. What you want to think of is their general framework. Not just what arguments are they going to run, what are they going to say this debate is about. Will opposition say this is about democracy? Will opposition say this is about fairness? Will opposition say this is about discrimination? What does opposition think this is about? And then two questions. First of all, do we agree with opposition on whether it's about this? If we agree, how do we prove their common metric better? That's also preemptive. Now, how do you integrate this into your speeches? It essentially looks like when your speech is structured in a certain way, so you start with, I don't know, characterization and content, then you have first argument, second argument, doesn't matter. Just simply have a part of your speech where you say, okay, this is probably what they're going to say. We agree or we disagree. Why do we agree or disagree, and how do we bring this up? So say something like, this is what we're probably going to say, here's what we think about this. Even if they say this, we have a response. Even if they prove this to a certain extent, our trip is more important. So my advice would be, this perhaps it's trivial and stupid, but maybe someone's going to use this and find it useful. When you write down your speeches, I would advise using two differently colored pencils. And use one color for your substantive case, and use the other for rebuttal. So when you try to integrate your rebuttal, be it preemptive or just like generally trying to integrate your rebuttal, which increases your speech because it's simply more elegant, more structured, has a better flow, it usually helps to write that rebuttal onto your paper with a different color. So what I do, I write my case in such a way that there's spaces. This doesn't look like anything because it's not a case, it's just an outline of this work. But when I write my cases, I write them in such a way that I have enough space in between lines, and in these spaces I add parts of rebuttal into specific parts of my speech where I want it to be. And I write in a different color, so I necessarily know it's here. So integrating your rebuttal in your speech is literally the same as integrating it onto your paper. You leave spaces and you put it in, filling in the gaps where the other team is responding to you. You put it where you need it, and the other color simply reminds that it's there. It's probably trivial advice, but it has helped me in the past, so maybe somebody's going to find this useful. Okay, so are there any questions regarding this specifically? Okay, then the last thing I want to talk about, and I think presumably the most important, because I think this is the only part of this lecture where I can actually tell you something you don't already know. And this is how to act in situations where you know nothing about the motion, and what are some template techniques that you can use, like just write them down in your notebook and go point by point and see if this helps any in a situation where you find yourself at a moment where you know nothing about the motion. So I think there are enough, so I'm going to split this in two parts. One is just rules of thumb when you know nothing about the motion, which you can go through like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do these steps help me? And the other thing is how to do incentive analysis. When we talk about debates, there are a lot of actors in them, and how this can help you go beyond the this person is angry, that's important type of generic analysis, which usually lands you at 4 with a backlash extension. So what to do when you know nothing about the motion? The first thing is, you can very often do a word-by-word analysis. Like literally write the motion down, go word by word, and explain why this word specifically is important. So for example, at the World there was a motion, this house would heavily disincentivize women from having children. So if you find yourself in a situation like Oliver and myself, where you're not very good at making narrative arguments in debates about women's rights, because you are the two ESL lads from the Balkans, what you can do is use word-by-word analysis to steer the motion towards being about something you know more about.
Could you repeat the motion?
This house would heavily disincentivize women from having children. So, if you look at it word by word, there is a reason why the CAT decided to put heavily disincentivize. At that point, the question is, how does the word look like when we start heavily disincentivizing? What does this mean in terms of government policy? This means we probably make it harder for women to have children because that's what incentive means. That means we probably give them less tax breaks. We probably give them less child support. They probably do not have paid maternity leave. In that situation, even if you don't know how to make narrative arguments, even if your opening is an EPL team that's going to be very persuasive in terms of like the woman's right to choose and so on and so forth, you can make the debate as being about policy. This is literally about where women have more money if they want to raise the child. And then you can also say from extension, sure, opening up is, or opening up whoever we're talking about, is excellent at proving that choice is important. But the way we enable or disable that choice is through policy. And we are the team that shows how this policy increases or decreases choice. How does this help? Because if you write down the motion and just go through it word by word, you might not be intuitively sure why anybody would heavily disincentivize women to have children. However, you may focus on the heavily disincentivized part. Simply imagine what the policy consequence of this would be and talk about these consequences and make the debate about that. And I think very often you can do that. Very often there's a specific part of the motion that you can focus on. For example, there was a motion in Belgrade Open, this house, as Serbia would pivot away from the European Union and pursue closer ties with Russia and Turkey. The fact that this motion has Russia and Turkey enables you to talk about either Russia or Turkey, depending on what you believe is more important. You can say, okay, here's why the EU and Russia are completely uncomparative and why Turkey is the only thing that matters. Here's why Russia is the only thing that matters. Having motions that are worded in a complex fashion means you can get to focus on different words and explain that this word is the most important thing in the motion. Very often you're going to find at least one word that gives you a hunch, at least a procedural hunch, as in how is this going to be implemented? It doesn't sound logical, even if it's principally justified. So this kind of word by word analysis is something I would advise you to do. The second thing is just don't panic and take some time to draw general presumptions from the motion. So for most motions you can draw general conclusions. I mean, there are two examples I think illustrate this very well. There was a motion at Tallinn UDC about women's rights groups in India using violent Indian goddesses as symbols of liberation. So because in Hinduism there are these goddesses that are dominant over men, and in iconography they are portrayed as being dominant over men, literally sitting on men, killing men and stuff like that. And so the debate was about whether women's rights groups should take this as symbols. So probably you do not know much about India. But the rule of thumb here is, do not be stressed out by the fact you know much about India and spend all of your time thinking about how all other teams certainly know everything about women's rights in India. Rather, draw general presumptions which you can draw about India. First of all, the info slide begins with, in Hinduism. What do we know about Hinduism? You probably learned in high school that it's regionally diverse, that there are different gods, so it's polytheistic. So here's the first thing you can draw conclusions from. It's a polytheistic religion. What are characteristics of polytheistic religions? There are some gods that are good, there are some gods that are bad. There are gods that are regionally specific. Some regions worship these gods, some regions worship other gods. This is something you can use to build an argument, because you can say, okay, for a prop, we can frame ourselves to say, okay, this goddess is probably very hated in southwestern India, but we can use another goddess because they probably have a god they worship. It's similar to Greece. If you're preaching to the Spartans, you're going to use Ares. If you're preaching to Athens, you're using Athena. So, and it's something you guys all know about because you heard about Greek mythology. What else can we draw from this? What are general conclusions we can draw about India? Probably very conservative. So even if you don't know how conservative India is, the reason why this motion was set implies that there is a dose of conservatism in that situation. Third thing you can draw. How do people react to this in a generally religious way? So obviously you're using religious symbols. The context of India doesn't matter. You can make a general argument about how people react when religious symbols are used. On one side you can say, this is going to appeal to them because now you can frame women's rights as being part of your religious code of conduct. You're more likely to act in a specific way. On the other side you can say, no, they're going to be very angry because now the feminists whom they hate are appropriating their symbols and using them in the wrong way. These are all things you can do without knowing what the specific context of India is. I think another notion that this can apply very well to is this house believes that Asian countries should pivot away from the US and align themselves with China. So even if you don't know IR, there are some general facts that you know. You know that the United States is very prone to organizing coups d'etats in other countries and imposing their governments. You can probably make a comparative that China is less likely to do that. You are aware that the Belt and Road Initiative exists. You don't need to know which countries it involves. You don't need to know how much money they've invested. You just need to know that there's a general interest China has in investing in other countries. From this you can draw a conclusion. They're more likely to be peaceful. They're more likely to bring infrastructure because their modus operandi is having countries believe that they're good, whereas the United States uses hard power and deposes government. This is probably more bloody and leads to more death. So literally something you learn in high school, or just a general premise that you get out of scrolling through Facebook as in the United States is imperialist, can be used for you to fashion general statements and general presumptions, and then just make a general argument about why active interventionist imperialists are worse than a country that invests, even if it invests with, I don't know, evil motivations. China is very bad, or how. I hear this argument every time, and these people always take it for it. So the third thing you can say is, okay, what can we draw from the motion? What is the reason that this motion was set? You can very often infer the problem from the fact that there is a motion, regardless of the fact whether or not you know something. So if the motion in round one of Cape Town WDC is that this house will forcibly break up enclaves of rich white Africans, rich white South Africans, who are descendants of the Dutch. You don't need to know very much about the specific context of South Africa. You can infer the problem from the motion. So probably it's about gentrification because they are increasing property prices. Probably it's about how the society outside perceives them and hates them because they're enclosed in their villas, while I, as a black person when I was a victim of apartheid and my family was a victim of apartheid and I'm traumatized by this and now I visually see them in their villas and their swimming pools and I have nothing and this makes me angry and how this makes me likely to behave. You don't need to know anything about South Africa. You just need to logically conclude that if I was a victim of colonialism and then I see my colonialists walled up in their ivory towers, I'm probably more likely to vote radical. Therefore, we're probably less likely to get actual policy because the policy discussion is going to be about who is going to kill more white people, which is literally what's going to be happening in South Africa. The most powerful party in terms of popular support is the Communist Party, which is essentially, they gave a statement that explicitly said, we're not advocating killing white people just yet. That's the party that's currently getting the most support and most traction in South Africa. The fourth thing is analogies. Very often knowing nothing about the motion does not mean you know nothing about the topic, it means you simply can't see what your side is. What the fuck is government in this motion? I think very often you can dumb down the motion by putting it in a way by saying that it's analogous to something else. So for example, there was this motion in Budapest Open, I don't know, 2 years ago or a year ago, I don't know, about having children specifically so they can donate stem cells or organs to another child. I think it was called Savior Siblings, yeah. So from like an intuitive perspective, it's very unclear what the object to this is. So you create another life, their life is not threatened. I mean, the lymphocytes specify that they survive and they live a largely normal life. You save another life. So what is the side that tries to claim this is bad? I think you can do this via analogy. You can say, look, if I kill all of you, and if I donate all your organs, I probably save more lives. This is not a reason to do that. Secondly, if you believe there is a moral responsibility of someone to donate their organs or parts of their body to save somebody else, wouldn't it then be logical to say that the state should prosecute everyone who does not have a donor card? Probably we do not agree to that. Probably we still give people the right to choose what to do with their organs after they die. If we give people the right to do that, then why do we simultaneously believe we can make people come into this painful life and also take away their organs? So you can just simply come up with analogies as to why we do not do something in the status quo and try to draw comparisons between those two things. And from there you can draw the principle. And I think that's something that could be a very useful thing. And the last advice I have in this particular argument is listen to the other side carefully. Very often, especially in high-ranking rooms, good teams win simply because they use a lot of complicated language and then they scare other teams into not responding. An example of this is Novi Sad UDC open quarters. So the motion was about the IMF taking complete control over the financial and monetary policy of countries into which it intervenes. So opening government is a very good team. So it's Assad and Jamie, they have won quite a lot of tournaments, they broke through that quarterfinal, and so on and so forth. And what they said, everything made sense, it's logical, it would probably be true in a syllogism. However, there was a problem in their case. And that was that they claimed, look, what the IMF does, wherever it comes, it decreases interest rates. Decreasing interest rates increases investment, that's good. The problem with this is, if you take away all the fancy words, what they're saying is, wherever the IMF comes, it does X. It always does X, regardless of context. You can probably find a problem in this situation. You can probably somehow intelligently conclude that some countries have mountains, others have rivers and plains, means that their economies are different. Some countries are more corrupt, some are less corrupt. Some have this kind of investment climate, some have another kind. You don't even have to know examples. You just have to infer that countries are different, and there is a probability that maybe somehow in 5 of these 50 cases this won't work, and probably the people on the ground know better. And at that point you've already exposed a significant problem in their case. So the advice is listen to what they're presuming, listen to what is their background premise. Take away the fancy words. I don't have to know what the IMF is. I don't have to know what an interest rate is, and I don't have to know what monetary policy is to conclude that it's probably problematic to say that I do the same thing in every situation. Because it's the same as interpersonal relationships. If I try to flirt with like 50 love targets, and I do it the same way every time, I'm bound to fail at least a number of times because they are different personalities. And something that one person finds attractive, the other person might not find attractive. And that's a very good analogy you can use. Like, use these dumb analogies. So make the motion sound like it's far simpler than what other teams are trying to make it about. I think that this is the advice I can give. And before we move on to the final drill, for which we're going to have 10 minutes, which is perfect because I imagine it as being like a short discussion, I just want to give you some rules of thumb for doing incentive analysis. So in many debates you have various actors, and it's hard to prioritize these actors, it's hard to predict how they're going to act. What I'm going to do is try to give you 3 questions, which I think you can ask yourself regardless of what actor you're talking about. Is it a state, is it an individual, doesn't matter. I think the first question is, what does the actor want? And I think here, again, you can very safely say that you can draw general conclusions about actors even if you do not know the specific context. So politicians are most often single-minded seekers of re-election and they want to get political support. States most often want to not be attacked and they want to survive. People generally want to survive and want to be happy. Like general conclusions about actors and what they want. Discriminated people want to not be discriminated and similar things. And the second question is, how far are they willing to go to get it? That is, what is the actor willing to trade off for a specific thing? So notably, if I am, so this is probably going to happen in debate because I'm dumbing it down, but if I'm a discriminated person, I probably want to not be discriminated. But if someone told me, I will not discriminate you if you let me murder your whole family, I will probably say no. Of course, like this is a very imaginary trade-off which will never happen, but it serves to illustrate the point. Even though you want some things, even though they're incredibly important to you, there are some boundaries you will never cross. So the question is, what does the actor want and how far is the actor willing to go to get it? And that how far is he willing to go to get it, i.e. what are they going to trade off? What is a trade-off acceptable to them is the second question. The third question is, what irrationalities are specific to actors? Because note that the first 2 questions kind of stem from rational choice theory. These actors have interests. They're going to make a calculus, this interest is less important, this interest is more important, I'm going to weigh it off, and I'm going to decide. The problem, and the reason why rational choice theory doesn't work, and also why capitalism doesn't work, but that's a different lecture, is because people are irrational. Because there are various irrationalities that stem from moral codes, stem from fears that affect actors. So the question is, what irrationalities impact the actor? What does the actor fear from the specific perspective of them being an actor? I think a very good example of this is Israel versus Iran. So, it's not likely that Iran will attack Israel, because Israel has the most powerful standing army in the world in terms of numbers, but in terms of technology, because Israel has nukes, because Israel has the United States, because Israel is generally far more powerful. However, people in Israel still fear being attacked by Iran, because there's a certain irrationality at work. It stems from being victimized by the Holocaust, it stems from living in a country that is literally a war zone every single day because of Hamas and the fact that Palestinians. It stems from the fact that you have religious reasons to believe that Iran will attack you, because you know that in Shia Islam, the concept of martyrdom is very important, and that the Ayatollahs of Iran very often make statements that we want Iran to be a martyr country, we want to facilitate the coming of the Messiah by emphasizing on martyrdom. These are various reasons that because you're in the specific position of an Israeli person, you still fear being attacked by Iran, regardless of the fact that you're probably not going to be attacked by Iran if you take it like a realist calculus. Second thing is, what moral codes do actors have? Sometimes you act irrationally because from your position it's rational. I think this applies to most religious debates. Like the general characterization of, if you are incredibly religious, you're probably going to prioritize your afterlife in front of your material life. From a rational choice perspective, that's a stupid thing to do, because you do not know if the afterlife exists or not. It's quite a wager. And everything that we know in the status quo probably implies that it doesn't exist. But if you're a religious person, it's perfectly rational to even go through suffering if you believe that suffering makes you more virtuous, and that fact is going to land you a better afterlife. So analyze what irrationalities do actors have. I think these 3 kinds of questions can help you make general characterizations of every actor that you come up with. And then the last thing that you do as a consequence of this is effect analysis. From what we have inferred through these questions, how will a certain policy impact a group? Because essentially debating is manipulating people. You have a group of people, you know their characteristics, you manipulate their fears, you manipulate their emotions, and you manipulate their interests in order to get them to do what you want. So effect analysis works this way. Given what we know about these actors, how are they going to act when we do this to them? Given the incentives of these actors, how are they going to act when we refuse to do this to them? When we refuse their rights, or we increase their rights? That's the question. characterize the actor. How is he going to react when we do something to him? And that's what debating essentially is, doing motions to people. Take a man, take all conclusions you know about that man, do the motion to him, ask yourself what happens, how is he going to react? Is he angry? Is he happy? Does he commit suicide? What happens? So, the final thing that I want to do in this particular workshop, and I imagine the discussion, I came up with, I didn't come up with it, another CA team came up with it, but I found it. I found a specific IR motion, and I want to have like a panel discussion about like incentives and general presumptions and all the rules of thumb I gave you on this motion. And we're going to do it together. So the motion is, Peter, I think you actually debated this one, I don't know if you want it.
Okay.
This house believes that, and Jolie also debated, the United States should not make complete nuclear disarmament a condition for meaningful sanction relief in North Korea. So this house believes the United States should not make complete nuclear disarmament a condition of meaningful sanction relief in North Korea.
What are we supposed to do?
My question to you guys is, let's say, again, we're OG. Let's try to make a frame together. What would we say this debate is about? What would we say the actors want? What arguments would we run? And try to use these questions as signposts for doing this. So first I'm going to give the floor to you. Like, what would be your first intuitions as to what you would want from government?
So the idea is they're probably never, to start off things, we should look at the words, for example, firstly, complete nuclear disarmament and meaningful sanctions. All of these things are important to make a case in the government. I think complete nuclear disarmament is something that is never likely to happen in North Korea. They're never likely going to accept this, considering that this is their bargaining chip that they can use. Otherwise, they fear they might be attacked or whatever. This is the only thing that kind of protects them, at least in their own narratives, in their own minds and everything else, considering that they're never going to let go of these things. Presumably, we're never going to lift sanctions which impact people's lives and every day and everything else. We should maybe, I'm struggling to find words, maybe we should make less to doesn't necessarily manual słowa. Conditions. Maybe they could accept such a thing.
Yeah. So you would probably want to frame the motions being okay. We can try to condition North Korea as to not act in an aggressive fashion, but they can still retain their weapons to defend themselves. We can give them other conditions, stuff like that. So, given that that's what you would probably want to do, how would you analyze, using these three questions, how would you analyze the incentives of North Korea? What are they likely to react to positively? What are they not likely to react to positively? So let's start with, what does North Korea want? When negotiating with the US, what does North Korea want?
Sanction relief, not changing the regime, and not dying.
Okay, fair. The last two things that you said are also the answer to my second question, and that is, what is the line that North Korea is not willing to cross? What is the line they're not willing to cross? I mean, specify further than not dying.
Anything that leads to them losing power either in their country or in the international community. So basically at the point where they lose their bargaining chip, they lose that much power that it could lead to their regime collapsing, aka them dying. Okay,
Try to infer why do they believe nuclear weapons are very important to the probability of them dying.
it works so far.
Yeah, it's a very dumb statement to make, but a nuclear power never invade another nuclear power, because if you nuclearly bomb someone, they're going to nuclearly bomb you, and the world's gonna go to shit. It's a very basic statement, and you don't have to know a lot about North Korea to do that. Now that we concluded this, we know that the mutual incentive for both sides is North Korea does not want to die. So they are not going to give up their nuclear weapons. However, do they also want to pacify their people? As in, have the people not revolt?
Yes.
And does this apply to the incentive of not dying as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So what kind of trade-off do we have to give to North Korea?
we have to give them enough power for them to stay in power, but still allow them to have some sanction relief, to pacify their people, basically.
Yes, that's true. And the reason why this is amplified are certain irrationalities which we know about North Korea. So what could you conclude? What irrationalities impact Kim Jong-un as the leader of North Korea? What does he fear?
Losing power, but not sure that is such an irrational claim.
Yeah, but I think you can use the analysis of irrationality. If the other team tries to say, look, North Korea is like a propaganda machine par excellence, they have completely closed all their borders, they have completely indoctrinated their people, he doesn't have to fear losing power. You can say, even if all of that is true, he probably irrationally fears losing power. Because the longer you are in power as a dictator, the more you close yourself off from others. We call this the Caesarist complex in political psychology. You start to distrust all your advisors, and you start closing them off from yourself. This means that not only that you believe they are plotting against you, but you're also unconsciously cutting off all sources of advice which can tell you to not be stupid and look at things rationally. This means you get closed off in your own thoughts and your own paranoia about losing power. It happens to most dictators. It happened to Hitler, it happened to Stalin. So literally the reason why, and this is a perfect illustration, the reason why Joseph Stalin died is because he was so paranoid that somebody is going to kill him that he instructed the stewards in front of his room not to let anyone into his room while he's asleep. The irony is, he was poisoned, but because his stewards were instructed not to let anyone in the room, including themselves, he lay there poisoned for 3 days and then he died, because nobody went in to check up on him. Because he refused to have anybody enter in the fear that he is going to be killed. And he was killed because of that. So that's the perfect illustration of how this works. So, the idea is here, nothing that we said is specific to North Korea. We never got more specific than Kim Jong-un is a dictator and he fears losing power. But there are a number of things we concluded. We came to the conclusion that they're never going to give up their nuclear weapons. We came to the conclusion that we want a trade-off that's going to let them pacify their people and retain their nuclear weapons as well. We came to the conclusion we probably are playing with a dictator with irrational making use his fears. All of these things can be applied to any general motion, any general case. How do people act when they're afraid? How do people act when they're presented with this or that kind of trade-off? And just go from there. You do not need many specificities to debate this motion. And I would contend when you hear this motion, you see your OG, you're probably like, fuck, this is very specific. But if you simply use very effective incentive analysis techniques, just analyze a state, a dictator, whatever, I think you have more space and more chance to go through this motion in a good way and take at least a second. And I think that this applies to motions that are not as specific as well. So for example, at WDC there was this motion about this House believes that anger should be accepted as the primary role of political discourse or something like that. I think the incentive analysis works very well here. Because if you take a look at incentives of, for example, voters and how the voters think, voters probably want to see somebody caring about them. If someone frames their narrative about being angry, about fighting injustice, you're more likely to think that somebody cares about you. Therefore, that incentive is fulfilled, and you're more likely to go out and vote. What do you fear as a voter? You fear the government. You fear the establishment. What does that mean? That means in the status quo, when anger is not the universal norm, but rather you have the establishment which is very rational and dispassionate and very about facts and figures, then the populists who get to claim the anger can differentiate themselves. Why? Because what do people fear? And that's again the rule of thumb question. People fear the government. People fear the establishment. People believe that the elites are against them. So if I'm Donald Trump and I say I differentiate myself from these elites, because I'm not going to bore you with numbers, I'm not going to wear a suit, I'm not going to talk fancy English, I'm going to swear, and I'm going to expose the injustice of the establishment, you pander to these fears. Then accepting anger as a general norm of political discourse means you make it less likely for populists to differentiate themselves via anger, because now everyone is angry, and everyone is responding to people's fears. So this is also a way in which this works. So you see, the incentive analysis works both in specific motions and also in less specific motions. So I think that just writing this down and going point by point and seeing which of these questions can help in specific motions could be something that you could use in the future. Okay, did this make any sense?
No.
Do you have any questions? Okay, in that case, enjoy lunch, I guess.
One.